Ron Howard's name is synonymous with Hollywood success. From a freckle-faced child actor to an Oscar-winning director, his career reads like a storybook. But behind the warm smile and legendary filmography lies a far more turbulent journey, one marked by bullying, dangerous accidents, death threats, financial desperation, and the quiet sacrifices that nearly cost him everything. Ron Howard was born in Duncan, Oklahoma in 1954, into a family of modest means. When he was just 4 years old, his parents made a gamble that would shape the rest of his life. They loaded up everything they owned and drove west of Hollywood, chasing the faint promise of opportunity. What they found was a tiny house in Burbank and a financial situation that teetered constantly on the edge of collapse. Ron's first brush with a camera came even before he could walk properly. At 18 months old, his father placed him in a brief scene in Frontier Woman on little more than a whim. That tiny cameo quietly ignited a spark. But his parents were determined that their son would not become one of Hollywood's cautionary tales. They imposed a strict rule: no full-time acting until Ron turned 5. That decision cost them dearly. To honor it, they turned down paying work, pawned household belongings, and watched their debt climb to what would be the equivalent of $5,000 today. Meanwhile, Ron's father, Rance, freshly out of the Air Force, struggled to establish himself as an actor and writer. At one particularly dark point, Rance seriously considered abandoning Hollywood altogether and returned to Oklahoma to farm. They stayed. It was a decision that demanded everything they had. When Ron finally landed his first credited film role in the 1959 production The Journey, the milestone was immediately poisoned. Crew members mocked the red-haired, freckle-faced 6-year-old with cruel nicknames, calling him a freckle-faced freak. His father confronted the abusers directly, even at the risk of losing the job entirely. The role paid just over $12,000, a small fortune for the family, but the emotional damage left a mark on both of them. By 1960, Ron had auditioned for and won the role that would define his childhood, Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. For 8 years and 249 episodes, he carried one of television's most beloved characters, and he did it beginning at just 6 years old. The show brought steady income and nationwide recognition, but it came with intense pressure, long scripts, rigid schedules, and the relentless demand for perfection in every take were Ron's daily reality at an age when other children were learning to ride bikes. He had no live audience to gauge reactions against, no margin for error. He grew up fast. His relationship with Andy Griffith became one of the most formative of his life. Griffith served as both a professional mentor and a surrogate father figure, guiding the young actor through the emotional challenges of the industry with patience and genuine care. But the experience wasn't without its shadows. Ron witnessed Griffith battle alcoholism firsthand, watching the man he admired occasionally explode in angry outbursts that unsettled the entire cast and crew. On one memorable occasion, Griffith read a scathing review aloud on set and visibly broke down, a rare glimpse behind a cheerful public persona that Ron never forgot. In 1973, a film opportunity arrived that seemed to promise a new chapter. American Graffiti, directed by a young George Lucas, would become a classic. But for Ron Howard, the production was something closer to a nightmare. Co-stars Harrison Ford and Paul Lumet subjected him to sustained and deliberate harassment throughout filming, in what Ron would later describe as his only experience of genuine occupied shaming. The torment included throwing beer bottles near his car, locking in a trailer so he would miss rehearsals, and spiking his drinks. The reason, as Ron understood it, they resented his child star background and didn't believe he deserved to be there. Ron said nothing. He endured it quietly, unwilling to damage the film or his own career by making the situation public. The humiliation was real and lasting. He completed his role and received a flat payment of $10,000, with no shared profits, despite the film going on to gross over $115 million at the U.S. box office alone. Several years later, Harrison Ford sought Ron out and apologized. He had come to understand the harm his behavior had caused. The apology brought some measure of resolution, but it didn't erase the experience. More importantly, it fundamentally altered Ron Howard's relationship with his profession. The bullying accelerated his decision to move behind the camera, where he could control the environment, and where no one could do to him what had been done on that set. Ron was cast as Richie Cunningham on Happy Days in 1974, and for a time it felt like a genuine fresh start. The premiere drew 11 million viewers. The show was funny, wholesome, and built around Ron's natural likability. Then something changed. By 1976, Henry Winkler's character Fonzie had become a cultural phenomenon. Ratings exploded to 31 million weekly viewers, and ABC executives began drafting plans to rename the entire series Fonzie's Happy Days. Ron Howard, who had carried the show since its first episode, received his notice through internal channels. His response was an ultimatum: change the title and he walks. It was a moment of uncharacteristic boldness, and it nearly torpedoed the production. What saved it was the audience. More than 10,000 letters flooded ABC in protest, demanding the original title be preserved. The network capitulated. Ron stayed. But the peace was uneasy. The financial disparities behind the scenes were striking. Ron earned $25,000 per episode at the show's peak, roughly a third of Henry Winkler's $75,000. Anson Williams, who played Potsy, made half of Ron's salary. These imbalances bred resentment that simmered beneath the surface for years. In 2012, Williams and several other cast members filed suit against CBS over unpaid royalties from Happy Days merchandise. Ron wasn't part of the lawsuit, but he has since acknowledged that those tensions came close to permanently fracturing friendships formed during the show's best years. While still appearing on Happy Days, Ron was quietly laying the foundation for what would become his true career. In early 1975, using a 2-week break and a budget of just $2,000, he shot his first short film, Deed of Daring Do. It was small, rough, and it won a minor prize at the Atlanta Film Festival that September. It was enough to convince him he was on the right path. His first feature, Grand Theft Auto, arrived in 1977 on a $600,000 budget and grossed around $15 million, a genuine success. But the production was nearly derailed before it was finished. The 1980s brought the films that established Ron Howard as a major Hollywood director. Splash in 1984, made for $11 million, earned nearly $70 million. Cocoon in 1985 grossed $85 million and took home 2 Academy Awards. But each success seemed to carry its own form of darkness. On Splash, Tom Hanks, then still an emerging star, threw explosive tantrums whenever the script was altered and nearly lost the role entirely after confrontation with production team. Ron stepped in and defused the situation. Cocoon brought something more alarming. A fired extra named Harold Jenkins began sending death threats to Ron and the crew. Fox Studios was forced to spend $150,000 on around-the-clock security for the duration of the shoot. In 1991, while directing Backdraft, an uncontrolled fire broke out on set on July 23, 1990, severely burning Kurt Russell's hand and face and injuring 3 crew members. An OSHA investigation followed and identified critical safety failures in production. The film earned $152 million at the box office. The human cost was harder to measure. During production of Ransom in 1996, Ron and his family received letters threatening his children's lives. Suspicious vehicles were spotted outside their home. The FBI became involved and temporarily relocated the family. These were not inconveniences. They were genuine terrors that Ron and his wife Cheryl navigated largely away from the public eye. Apollo 13 in 1995 came close to never being made at all. Production was briefly shut down in October 1994, costing approximately $2 million, as Ron nearly walked away from the project entirely. He pushed through, and the film ultimately grossed $355 million worldwide. A Beautiful Mind in 2001 brought him the pinnacle of industry recognition, Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director. But the set was volatile throughout. Russell Crowe's behavior was so disruptive that Ron fired him during production, then rehired him days later to avoid the financial consequences of replacing him. The Da Vinci Code in 2006 ignited a firestorm. The film's suggestion that Jesus had married Mary Magdalene and fathered a child brought protests, international bans, and death threats directed personally at Ron Howard. The film grossed over $760 million worldwide. The threats were real regardless. In 2015, his production company Imagine Entertainment faced a lawsuit from 54 Sudanese refugees who alleged that their stories had been exploited for the film The Good Lie without fair compensation. The case settled confidentially in 2017 when Ron took over Solo, a Star Wars story in 2018 after the original directors were dismissed. He inherited a production in chaos. He ultimately shot approximately 70% of the film himself, with costs ballooning to $275 million. The film earned nearly $400 million globally, but was widely considered a commercial disappointment. Through all of it, the early poverty, the bullying, the on-set accidents, the legal battles and threats, one constant remained: Cheryl Alley Howard. They met in high school. Their first date was in November 1970. Ron proposed 3 times before she said yes in October 1974. They married the following year. In the early years of their relationship, Ron delivered newspapers to fund their evenings out, bringing in around $150 a month. A car accident in 1971 left him with whiplash and $3,000 in medical bills. He sold his bicycle to help pay for treatment. Despite American Graffiti's enormous success, Ron received a flat $10,000 and no share of the profits. He had asked George Lucas for 1% of the box office returns. Lucas declined. The refusal strained their friendship for years. Ron and Cheryl raised 4 children together. In 2025, they celebrated their golden anniversary. 50 years of marriage, a quiet triumph that outlasted every lawsuit, every threat, and every difficult set. Ron Howard's story doesn't fit neatly into the narrative of the charmed Hollywood life. It is a story of a child mocked on his first film set, a young actor bullied by his co-stars, a new director who watched a man get seriously injured on his first